I'm going to put a design in this, and your designs should come from your amazing and incredible and fabulous imagination, from your work doing Zentangling, from all of your other drawing that you've done for fun, from observations in the world. And once I have a design made, it doesn't need to be terribly long, I'm then going to use a different tool to make that line thicker and more interesting. But in particular, wider, not deeper, but wider, because that's how the seal, is going to work. So I use this digging tool, and I'm going to dig my design. And because you guys are beginning pottery students, you're going to work hard at your designs. And if your first one looks bad, which it might, you're going to start another one. You can use both sides of this piece of clay. So you can try to use both sides of this. You can have more than one strip of clay to work with at a time. And you can make several until you get one that looks good. So as I do this design, I'm adding to it. I kind of had an idea once I made my lines what else I would do to it. And it doesn't need to really be longer than this. Is about 6 inches long. It can be between 4 and 6 inches long. It doesn't really need to be that long. So that's one tool to dig out with. There are other tools. These are little wire tools. You can also use these tools to dig out the clay. So I'm going to do that to add to my design. And I want you guys to see that there are other choices of things to use to dig out the clay. It's probably a little bit hard to see this, but it is digging in to the clay. Other tools you can use are just these plastic tools. They will also dig into the clay, and remember, we're going a little more wide than deep, but you can use that to fix up edges, and it's really a matter of trial and error too. Which tool you feel most comfortable handling, which tool seems to be doing what you want the clay to do, how to get the design in there without making it too deep or too thin. And finally, I think I have a couple of different wire tools. That's what else I took. There's wire tools with different loops on the end, so I'm going to use this one as well. So this isn't going in as deeply as my other lines, and so that means that the print that it will make on the clay is going to be a little less pronounced. Do one more here. I'm trying to keep a consistency there. Okay, so now I have this piece, and now I'm going to show you how to attach it together. The clay should be what's called leather hard, or a little not quite leather hard, when it's time to attach it and to make it into a seal. These pieces of clay, which I'm about to break, are too hard to be able to bend and turn into a seal. Sorry, Shannon. And same with this one, Celia. So we can't bend it. So those are too hard, not good. These are fine, we can tell, because it's easily bent and nothing's going to be wrecked. So now what I want you to do, though, is I want you to use a fettling knife, and near the edge of the design, you're going to cut on an angle. So I'm holding the knife on an angle like that, and I'm going to hold the knife on the same angle on the opposite end. And then I'm going to show you how we connect clay. So we connect clay using a rib, a serrated rib, and I dip it into a little bit of water, and I score the edges of the clay with the wet rib on one side, and I score it here on the other side. And this is the common way of attaching pieces of clay. And then I smooch these pieces together, push them together. I try not to do anything to my design. I gently smooch the clay there so that it's smooth. And then the inside, I'm also going to use my finger and smooch the clay. And now I'm going to let this become about this hardness, like this. So I'll wrap it up at the end of the class, and then when I come back the next day, I'm going to go back into this and clean up any of the pieces of clay that are sticking up. Go back with my tools to make sure it's well crafted and the design looks strong, and maybe even have an opportunity to clean up here in the seam and add a design into that seam part so there's not a gap. Because let's use this one. What they end up looking like is something like this, that you would then be able to roll and print directly on a piece of clay that you would use to build something. So ultimately, your design is going to come out something like that. Mine won't look like that, of course, but it'll look, that's how it's going to print into the clay. So that's one method. The other thing I want you to try doing is to make a relief design. So those were intaglio designs, and now I want you to try to make a relief design. So a relief design means that I'm going to cut out shapes or lines and I'm going to attach them to the piece of clay. So I'm going to cut some little lines of clay using from my slabs. We're filming, so just have a seat over there. And now, just like I showed you how you attach those pieces of clay, I'm going to attach these pieces of clay. First I'm going to kind of smooth it a little bit. And then I'm going to figure out where I want it to go before I start attaching it. I was kind of thinking I wanted a little more geometric looking design. So this is me working with line and shape, which you guys are quite capable of doing, and I'm kind of thinking about it as I go along. I'm going to make it about 4 inches long, like the other one was longer than that, but I don't want this one to be quite as long. Okay, so I think that's going to be kind of cool. So now what I'm going to do is, using this tool again, I'm going to score the bottom side of this little piece, and I'm going to try not to use too much water because these are delicate little pieces. Uh-oh, where did that go? Is that right here? Yeah. And I score, and if I can't get in to the little area where I might need to, I can score by hatching with a knife or a pin tool as well. So it doesn't have to be that tool. Anything that will score and increase the surface area of the clay. Now, a smart thing to do would be to remind myself where these pieces are. I think I'm just going to use this tool too. It's good for you guys to know that there's other ways of scoring without just using that serrated rib. But there's one thing I kind of need, Celia, if you'll get for me, is there's a little sponge over there. The little ones. So I'm adding a little water. Yeah, that's great, thank you. I'll need that in a little while. Good, thanks. And then every connection, I'm going to score both sides that connect. And smooch it on. Just place it on to begin with. And I just dipped my tool in the water to add a little slip to it. Slip is what's really connecting the two pieces. That's wet clay. But just adding a little bit of water helps. This does not mean that you get to cover your piece in water by any means. And some reason students think that that's okay. It's just the connections that need some wetness, not really the top of it or any other part of it particularly. It will just make the clay less easily, harder to handle. So when I score the area, I hatch and cross hatch, so I go in both directions.
Ooh, I can't believe it's not butter. It's really nice. Okay, hang on to that. Okay, let's grab that.
They can see what I'm doing okay here, Shannon?
Yes.
Okay. Very grateful to have a cinematographer. Okay, so this is the last piece I'm going to put on. And now there are going to be some refining touches to do to make sure that this stays on properly. The clay is nice and soft, so that means that it's going to stick to itself pretty well. But I'm also going to use at least one tool. One of these plastic tools, there's wood tools over there. You find a tool that's going to work for you. And then what you have to do, you've got to carefully connect these little pieces of clay to the bottom piece of clay. So just with a little tool, it's easier to do with a tool than your fingers because your fingers are probably too big to get into these little areas. So on every side where it's touching the bottom piece of clay, I've got to use this tool to connect the clay to the clay. And that is a very normal way of making sure you attach pieces of clay to each other. So what you're doing is you're doing a practice that you'll be doing for any time you attach pieces of clay to each other. This is what you always do. Depending on the type of project, sometimes you add a reinforcing coil. I don't think you'll need to add a reinforcing coil to these pieces, but so I'm not really sure how this design is going to look until it's gone through a firing, actually, because we can't use it until it's been fired. And I'll explain that another day about why. But what I want from these, from this class, from both my pottery classes, is to make a good seal that is an intaglio seal, or it's cut in to the clay, and a good seal that's a relief, that is sitting on top of the bottom piece, so sticking out, and that's a relief. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do here is I take a sponge, a little yellow sponge, and I get it wet, but I squeeze it out a lot, so it's really not wet. It's one of my favorite things to say, a not wet sponge, because you don't want to slime this thing with a bunch of water, because it'll just, the thing will just start to disintegrate in front of you. But with a not wet sponge, I can smooth my marks. And there should be small sponges, and I'll even have some more that are probably cut so that you can get into the little crevices. But using the sponge and the tools, you make sure your connections are smooth and look good. And I'm going to wait and finish that a little bit later because the clay is pretty wet. Because just like this one, you're going to fix it when it's a little more leather hard. You're going to do that with this one. Okay, so I'm going to repeat what I did the last time. I'm holding the knife, the fettling knife, at an angle, and cutting the clay at the edge, and I'm going to do it the same at this edge. And remember, the clay has to be nice and wet in order to connect these well. Then this time I'm going to easily use the rib to score it, and the rib to score it. And then to connect them. And this one will be easy to attach one more line in there so that I don't have a gap. So just using the tool, I'm going to connect that seam, and on the inside and on the outside and on the inside. And then I'm going to let that also start to get a little more dry so that I can rework the surface and make it look smooth. And plus, I'm definitely going to add something here where that seam was. So the assignment is going to be that you make 2 different seals. Okay,